Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira.
Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Thomas.
And today we are going to talk about a pretty, hopefully entertaining subject and something I get asked a lot in a different way than this. But today we're going to talk about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a jerk is your ex? Or how jerky is your ex? Or how big a bleep is your ex? Or how high conflict is your ex? Or whatever phrase you want to use for it. But you know, how bad is
Mother
my
trucker.
ex? I get asked that question a lot by men and women alike. This isn't a episode that's specific to moms or dads.
Yeah, right.
I think the thing that's helpful, well, I think we have more examples of moms, probably just because moms talk about it more.
Right, and because you have more moms in your coaching group.
Well, you have dads in your coaching group. So.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
But one of the things that happens is people do ask this a lot, like, how bad is my situation, the one I'm dealing with? And I think that is part of the benefit of the group coaching is it does give you some perspective, because a lot of times you come into it thinking, wow, this is just miserable. This person's horrible. None of my friends or family have ever seen anything like this. It's crazy, blah, blah, blah. And then you get in a group with other people that are moms or dads that are dealing with a similar situation, or sometimes far worse than what you're dealing with. And then you're like, oh, wow, I should just be happy I have the jerky ex that I do.
Right. Well, when I was practicing, before I was practicing family law, when I got my divorce, I used to think that I had the worst ex possible. I really did. And I thought she was difficult. She was hard to communicate with. We had conflict, blah, blah, blah. And then I started practicing family law. And I discovered that my ex
ain't so bad.
She's not so bad. She really isn't. You know, over the years, we've gotten to where we can cooperate. Yeah. So everybody thinks they have the most horrible ex in the world.
Yes. And I found mine to be pretty difficult as well. I remember in the beginning, Thomas used to say to me, nobody can be as bad as what you're describing. And then after a few years of being with me, he's like, you know what? You're right. Yes, what you're describing is pretty accurate. But I think the difference is that, you know, over the years, obviously, I've seen cases that are much more extreme than what I experienced, although I did have my fair share of stuff. But unlike Thomas, I don't think my opinion of my ex has shifted as much as yours has. You and her have really kind of come full circle from like completely not speaking at all,
right,
to really now, you know, well, just recently, you know, one of the kids had an accident in one of her cars. And so I was on the phone with her a little while ago. So we were coordinating how we're going to get everybody where they need to be all week with the remaining vehicles that we have between the homes. So, you know, of course the kids are grown. And so there's not as much, you know, animosity and things. There's not as many issues to deal with, but, so that helps. But with my ex, he was always just kind of didn't contribute. And I would say that's pretty much how I describe him now. I mean, I think he has more communication and more interaction with my kids than he, you know, more consistently than he did.
But you could have used a little help.
But he's still, but still really when crises hit, I'm the person that gets called.
Right.
You know, he doesn't help as much on that front.
Right. So describe a case that you think is an 8 or higher.
An 8 or higher.
Yeah. Think about it. Okay. I've got one in mind, but you want me to go first?
For the dads, you have one in mind?
I have one for the moms.
Oh, for the moms. See, moms are what come into your mind too. You just have more volume.
Because moms are evil.
You have one where the mom is the difficult one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was asking. Yeah, you have one for the dads to show how difficult the mom is.
Oh, yes.
Okay, then let's hear your first.
Right.
By all means, gentlemen first.
Well, you know this case because you're involved.
I'm sure we both know all of them, but
yeah. And this was a guy that we represented about, I would say, 7 or 8 years ago, and he just. We had kind of a hysterical, overprotective mom that just couldn't bear to and she used to stalk him and
Oh, I know what you're
surveil
talking
him.
about.
I'm trying to remember what it was that she did, but she came over to his house or something. What was that about? Do you remember?
I don't remember her coming to his house, but this is probably one of the most extreme cases of a difficult mom that Thomas and I have ever seen in the history of doing this. And this might take the cake actually for moms and dads across the board. But one of the things that she would do that I really remember, and I kind of even at one point tried to help a little bit with the transitions or whatever. Thomas and I are a lot about like, what can we do to solve problems for this family and all this kind of thing. And so I thought maybe I could, have.
I remember when you told me you were going to do that, I said, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah, I thought maybe I could have an impact, and let me just say I was wrong. Okay, I was way, way wrong. But anyway, so I went the one time, and what she would do, the children were young. It was two little girls. They were maybe like, I don't know, 5 and 7 or, 7 and 9 or somewhere in that neighborhood. And when it was time for Dad's transition, she would go out onto her front porch area, and she would stand there with the children and sob and cry and hug them and say, "Oh, I know you don't want to go with your dad, and it'll be okay." I mean, literally, it was that dramatic.
Right.
And I was astounded. I was completely and utterly astounded. I had never seen anything at that level to that point. And
she was enmeshed with the kids.
Oh, extremely. But the thing that was so odd to me is like, I think we all have feelings like that as parents, especially if our kids are younger and the breakup is new and you're adjusting to your kids aren't with you half the time or a big portion of the time or whatever it is. And it's hard, right? As a parent, like we have feelings too, and we love our kids, and it's that separation from them is difficult. When they're teenagers, that's one of the things that was not quite as difficult for me. My kids were 11 and 15. It was kind of like, oh, a 2-day break, please go with that. I felt a little bit differently about it, but I think when they're younger, it's a lot harder. And so, when she would do that, I couldn't help but think to myself, these poor children.
Right.
These poor children, because you're putting all this pressure on them to where they don't even have permission to even want to see their dad at all. And I don't think they had 50-50 custody. I think mom had a little bit more.
Right. And then when we tried to transition them, they would scream and yell. The kids would scream and yell.
They would cry and melt down. And when Dad was first explaining this to us, honestly, I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, well, why? Oh, do they have fun? Do they enjoy their visits? Oh, yeah, everything's fine once they get to the house, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, then why are they melting down like that at the transition? Normally kids that are melting down at the transition are kids who are resistant to the visit all the way across the board. But that didn't seem to be happening with these children. Once they got there and got settled, which is the case with most kids, let me just say, everything is fine. But they would have these meltdowns at the point of transition, and I didn't understand it until I saw it with my own 2 eyes.
Right. And I think that with women, there are different tendencies that are at the extremes of our masculine and feminine natures. Same for men. Like your men tend to be your narcissists and your...
they're rigid and...
What's the other one? The psychopathic
sociopath.
The one that
antisocial.
Whereas the women tend to be the borderlines and the hysterics.
Right.
And this one was hysterical and obviously relying on the kids for her own needs. But he was just he was so at his wit's end on how to deal with this person.
Yeah. And he had been super patient, in my opinion, given what he was up against.
Yeah. Right. Just be careful who you make children with. Yeah.
We have all done that one. Good Lord. So that probably is one of the most extreme versions that I have seen. We also, while we're on the subject of dads, we had a dad that was a client about, I would say this has been about 8 or 9 years ago, somewhere in there. And this guy had been he was self-employed and, pretty successful. And they had, they had always been both highly participative in the children's schools and activities and all their things. This was two little girls again. And both parents had participated a lot, been on the PTA, been involved at school, the whole thing. And they kind of had the luxury of doing that because they were self-employed. And then mom, got in her head that dad was having an affair, which I don't think he was. We never saw any proof of that. We had the case for a couple years.
Did he deny it?
And usually you can tell. Yeah, he said it absolutely wasn't true. That there was never.
I don't remember. I don't know who you're talking about.
You just don't know who I'm talking about yet, but you'll figure it out here in a minute. And so we remember we went into court, and they had totally asked for everything, every assessment under the sun. They wanted him to have a psychiatric evaluation. They wanted him to have a psychosexual evaluation or something. All these different things, because she's suddenly claiming, he's a pervert, he's a child molester, he's all those things.
Right.
But for the last 12 years, he's participated in all these activities with our girls and all this stuff. And it just didn't fit together. And this is a person that, in our opinion, did actually successfully alienate the children. Now that's a term that we don't use very often. The court, people get accused of that a lot in court, and that term is thrown around a lot. And I find most of the time when somebody's alienated, it's because they're not stepping up to the plate as a parent. That's most of the time. It's a double-edged sword. It takes two people to contribute to that level of alienation usually. But in this particular case, I do think that this mom single-handedly alienated the children. Didn't who I'm talking about.
Yeah,
now,
didn't they have a house in Bali or something?
No, he had worked overseas for a little bit,
but but they took the kids there, and
they had traveled with the kids abroad.
And I think it was Bali. I think it was Bali.
Well, maybe it was, but
anyway, I'm pretty sure it was.
It was Indonesia somewhere, but I don't think it was Bali.
Yeah, and
you're thinking of. I have a current client,
and she thought that he was having an affair with somebody over there, and I think I remember that.
Yeah. So anyway, and I mean, for 2 years they fought, and this dad really didn't see his kids hardly at all. I think a handful of times in a supervised situation in a public restaurant with a supervisor, and that was about it. And eventually the court did, come to understand that she had totally alienated the kids, and they flipped custody, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, that was, I think, after you were no longer on the case. But but that was a very extreme one. And so, it's kind of funny because you can feel like on the day-to-day, like the person's a jerk or they're difficult or they're whatever. But when you get into situations where people are actually preventing one parent from seeing their children, that's like a whole nother level. And it can be hard to deal with, and it can be scary, So, hopefully even just those two, if you're a dad, be glad you don't, you might be dealing with something difficult, but be glad you're not quite at that extreme. Most people are not. Now, on the mom side, I think it's a little more subtle in some ways.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Because, why? Because I think men are better at appearing a certain way, even though they're behaving. Whereas women, we tend to be emotional and we just act that and go with it. And it's kind of like out there for everybody to see more.
Right. How about that mediation where the guy got a place in her neighborhood? Remember that one?
Yes. Yes. We had a mediation a few years ago where mom lived in a neighborhood, and kind of on the opposite side of the street, there was an apartment complex, and dad moved into that apartment complex. Now, not right where he could see the house, I don't think, or anything, but he was definitely within a very short walking distance. And of course, his explanation was, well, I'm right here near the kids' school and near all the things.
Yeah,
and
I'm just doing it for convenience sake.
There was it's like you could have gone and lived just on the other side of the school instead of the same side of the school mom was on. There's another 3 or 4 apartment complexes to choose from.
And this guy was he was a master at kind of these little technicalities where that he was trying to poke her button or push her buttons or poke her in the eye, but it had total deniability, right?
Right. It was plausible deniability, right?
Yes.
And Yeah. And so that one is pretty extreme. I would say a lot of the things that I see with the dads on the day-to-day of the clients that I'm coaching, a lot of it is sort of this language of like, well, we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Well, you're not, I've got a couple dads that are like, well, you're not doing the homework with her, or you must not have studied with him because he got a C on that test.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you're not giving me enough details about what's going on your week. And I have a couple clients that do transition notes on their talking parents, and I hate them. I got to say, this goes right up there for me with calls during the other parent's parenting time. I hate them because it just puts the kid square in the middle on the calls. That's my main issue with that. But the transition notes, it's almost like, okay, here's our weekly opportunity to
poke the bear.
Yeah, or try to avoid being poked by the bear, whichever. But I do have clients that have said, look, I've had people in the past that have said the transition notes help to cut down on, I get something from this person every day.
Yeah.
And it sort of cuts it down to like,
it's like make a note of it.
Yeah. It's like, put it in your transition notes at the end of the week. You don't need to contact me all 7 days. Like that kind of thing.
It'd be funny is to do transition notes, but just put a bunch of BS in them.
That would be what you would do. Hence the reason you didn't have transition notes. And I think they can be helpful if you're cooperative. But here's the thing. If you have a non-cooperative ex, that's all the transition notes are going to be. Opportunities for them to state even more why they don't have to cooperate with you.
Yes.
It doesn't really solve the problem in my experience.
Right. So scale of 1 to 10 on this guy?
On which one?
The one that with the transition notes.
Oh, well, I was thinking I've got like 3 or 4 of them right now that do that. I would say those people, honestly, like maybe a 7.
Yeah. If the one that I described at the outset was maybe a 10 or like a 9, maybe.
What, the guy that moved in across?
No, the gal that.
Oh, yeah, she was really extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody said to me, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the worst you've ever seen? I said, a 12.
Yeah.
So, and usually it's around, it's funny because a lot of times it's around things that don't matter.
Right.
It'll be like, I've got one right now that's arguing about the form of the support payment. Like there's been like 10 rounds of communication about the form the support payment will be.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Supposedly on the premise of documentation. But I mean, let's face it, we've got how many different apps now? We've got Venmo and Zelle and PayPal and your bank accounts and there's.
Is this the one that was insisting that she give her?
Well, I wasn't given too much information because they're currently in court. But I just want to be careful. But yes, he was demanding that she provide information for him to make, personal financial information before he could make the support payment because that's what was required. And it's like, no, that isn't what's required.
Right. And you want to have boundaries like that. I certainly wouldn't want my ex-wife to have access to my bank accounts.
Right.
I would, it's okay to have an account to use to make the payments. That can be useful. But that account would be just for the payments.
Right.
Right.
Because the problem is this person knows everything about you, right? Like if Thomas and I get a divorce, even if he goes and opens a new bank account, not that hard. I've got his social. I've got his date of birth. I got his mother's maiden name. I got his children's dates of birth. I got his blood type. I got his,
my first dog, my first car.
Yeah, that's right. Your first girlfriend's name. Like I know all the secret questions, right? Have you ever owned a house on this street? Nope. I got it. So it makes it really kind of, difficult. I would say vast majority of people aren't willing to go that far, but you do have a handful of people that are. And so it can become scary when people start doing things after the breakup that you feel are kind of uncharacteristic, or you didn't realize that they went to the extreme that they do. And then you start getting nervous about providing your financial information. So,
right. Well, I think with that case, those cases where you've got somebody who knows how to push your buttons, you can shut that down.
Yes. And I had actually this client that we're talking about. She said to me after the first month we were working together, she said, "This has completely turned my case around. Working with you has completely turned my case around."
Yeah.
She said, "I didn't know if it was going to be the best thing I ever did or the worst thing I ever did, but after the first month, I had my answer because this has completely turned my case around." So it's hard because you get into this mode where you're like fighting with them because they're being so unreasonable and it's so difficult. It's like the mom you described in the beginning. Like, what do? You go to pick your kids up and they're all standing on the porch and crying and doing all these things. And you can call the police to enforce your order, but then what does that do to the kids? And a lot of times there's not good answers for this. There's not an ideal answer for this. There's only the least damaging answer.
Well, I think that the answer for the hysterical, for the first person who has a psychological enmeshment with the child and is relying on the child and parentifying and that kind of thing. Does everybody probably not know what I'm talking about? In other words, using that child to meet your emotional needs.
The problem is that person doesn't recognize that they do that. So they don't recognize that they need any help for that. And the other parent is left to try to figure out how to handle it.
Yeah. And what I advise my guys on that is focus on your parent-child relationship. In other words, you can't control what's happening in mom's world. All you can do is control what you have control over, which is your world. So I tell them, go to, do some anticipation where you say, next week we're going to go to the beach and we're going to, get some shovels and we're going to dig some holes in the sand and we're going to walk and we're going to talk and we're going to, and involve the children in the planning and the preparation.
The planning?
The planning and the plittination.
Yes. I was to say, now you said it again. You're being completely incoherent. We're going to turn your mic off.
Yes, I know. It happens, when I smoke marijuana before the show.
Oh, my goodness. That is a joke for anybody that doesn't know that it would not happen, especially not living with me.
No, but there's something we talk about that helps in relationship building. Overall, you want to establish some family traditions in your world.
Right.
For us, it's road trips. We've mentioned that before. And if you love camping or you love hiking, you go out and you get the shoes. You go out and you
buy the tent. You
explore what sites you're going to go to and that kind of thing. And you get the kids excited about that.
Yeah.
In other words, you are responsible for your relationship with the kids.
Right.
And when you have somebody who's parentifying and is doing this to the kids, sooner or later that's going to break down.
Yeah.
That's not a sustainable family system.
Right.
And so you have to wait that out.
Yeah, because eventually the kids are going to get older too, and they're not gonna react the way that they're reacting right now. But it's interesting because you said this is my advice for the dad that's dealing with the hysterical person. Right. But actually the advice is the same for the mom dealing with the difficult, manipulative, or bullying dad. Because a lot of times, a lot of it is dad saying, "You're not doing this," or "The child is not making good grades. That's your fault. The child did this. That's your fault. The child got in trouble at school. That's your fault." I have moms who will say, "Well, the child's really acting out at my house," and dad will say, "Really, I don't have that problem, so the problem's you."
Right.
And what you don't understand, if you're in that situation and you're dad, then here's what I would tell you: the children are probably too afraid of you to react that way. And I'm not saying that being afraid of dad is necessarily a bad thing. I was afraid of my father in certain respects growing up. I believe Thomas's kids and my kids are both afraid of their respective fathers in certain ways. And that's dad's job, right? Is discipline and still a little bit of, fear. If you step out of line, you're going to have a consequence or whatever. That is not how children react to mothers. So it doesn't mean that your children's mother is inadequate or something in some way if the children are acting out in her home. It means that they're probably understandably too afraid to do that in your home. And so really she needs your support. When Thomas's kids were little and they would come and they would have done something at their mother's, Thomas's words to them were, you obey your mother. If your mother has to call me to come over there because you're disobedient or you're getting in trouble or acting out or doing something, you're going to be in big trouble.
Right.
And so really mom needs support in that realm. And what most dads want to do is to take that and say, Mom, you're inadequate in some way because I don't have this particular problem in my household.
Because they're trying to use it to their advantage.
They're trying to use it to their advantage. And honestly,
that doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It usually backfires. And honestly, post-divorce, the number one thing you can do for your kids is try to co-parent as seamlessly as possible. And that happens when the other parent feels like you have their back. And I don't think you can start there.
Yeah.
We didn't start there, but you definitely have to start by disengaging and not getting into the mix with them.
Well, here's what you can do. You tell your kids when they complain about mom in mom's world, you tell them, that's your mother. You need to respect your mother.
Right. And same thing about dad. When they say, I don't want to go to dad's, I'm sorry, this is your dad's parenting time.
Yeah. You need to go.
Right. You don't have a choice in this. And I think for the most part, that's what we see the courts want from people.
Right.
And it's hard because if you don't do that and you kind of give them an out, a lot of times what happens is they start to get 11, 12, 13. They start running their own ship more and more. And if you've been giving them that out, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem. And usually there's a breaking point at that age. And so really, I think one of the reasons that we didn't really experience a break like that with Thomas's kids. And I think it's because we did always enforce, this is your mom's parenting time and you have to go. Now, I can't say that if she did or didn't do that from her end. I don't necessarily think she did, given her marital relationship at the time. I'm not sure that there was that level of support for us, but we always gave that for them. And then you have to kind of learn how to play defense for your part of it without stepping over the line and engaging in battle.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a hard line. It's like when somebody sends a thing and says, well, you're just failing because, our child's failing because you're not spending enough time studying with him and you're not doing all these things. Then, what I always tell my moms is, don't respond to that unless there's a question of, I can't find page 6 of the math homework. Do you know where it is?
Right. Yeah.
You have to not engage in those attacks. That's the only way to protect yourself.
And that's really hard to do because, gosh, you want to fire back.
You
do.
You do. But
it's so frustrating to just let that go because you feel like if you don't answer it, then you're admitting it. There's this sense.
Right. But that's not the case.
It's not true.
And I'm yawning. I don't think the court, I don't think we've ever seen the court see that as, oh, you didn't respond to that, therefore you are admitting it. I've never seen a judge.
It's not a strong argument, really.
Yeah.
When you're looking at talking parents records and stuff like that, it's not that great of an argument.
Right. And, people underestimate how much shifting that communication will improve your life.
Yeah, it will, because you can train them.
Yes.
And that's true of the gals too.
Yes.
Is you can change your expectation of how you're going to react to things. We had one guy who, a very extreme case involving domestic violence, and he was very reactive and just very when he came into our office for the consultation, he was so angry. I was a little bit afraid of him.
Yeah.
And I said, you want to turn this case around, you got to start by losing that anger.
Right.
You've got to turn that. And we actually coached this guy for a year. We got fairly deeply involved with him. And that case we turned around. And it started because what we told him was, don't ever react to her because she would push his buttons and be nice, and leave her kind of scratching her head going, what's wrong with this guy?
Well, and here's what happened with him on the messages. And I have this experience with every single VIP that I have, just about it, is one of the main places I start is filtering that communication. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's the first thing that's going to improve your life and lower the conflict and lower your stress. Number two, it's going to make you look better to the court and help your court case. And number three, it's going to start pulling your kids out of this vice grip, is what I like to call it, where they're caught in the middle. Yeah. And so the first thing I look at is communication. And what I have somebody like this do is essentially everything is filtered through me for at least the first 30 to 60 days, if not more. Now with this guy, I think everything was filtered for at least 6 months. Yeah. Because he struggled so bad. And here's what would happen. He would go, but I need to say this, and I want to say this, and I got to tell her this. And I would say, no. And he's like, dang it, you won't let me say anything, blah, blah, blah. And he would get really angry with me, especially in the beginning. But the thing I could say about him is he always followed my advice. He would get angry and he would argue with me, but he always followed my advice. And what happened is he still had a domestic violence restraining order, but he was in a situation where Mom actually agreed to let him have unsupervised overnight parenting time, even though there was no court order for such a thing. Right. We were able to shift her perception of him that much just through changing how he communicated.
Yeah, it was like magic.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, and this works.
Yeah. People underestimate how well this works. Yeah. Shifting your communication with the other parent can turn around your entire court case, and I've seen it on multiple occasions.
Yeah, that and changing the way you relate to your kids too, to a more active, parental, involved. Right. And being the parent. Right. Not allowing them to dictate the rules in your house. Yeah. I find that most people overestimate the jerkiness of their ex. And that might not be popular. Everybody's turning off the radio now. No, but it's true. You see, here's the problem. People are, what's the quote from John Paul Sartre? Hell is other people. And other people are hard to deal with. Right. And when you break up, it's natural to have some animosity towards your ex. I know I did. Right. I was a left spouse. You better believe I did. Right. And part of what's really helped me over the years is to reframe that. Right. This is something that my divorce coach worked with me on. And he said, well, we've got to we have to change the way you think about her. Right. From, oh, she's just a jerk. I hope that a piece of space debris falls out of the sky and hits her. Right. To, she's
got her own struggles.
She's got her own struggles. It's hard being her. And I had a part in what happened. Right. I had a part in the reason for the breakup. There is a reason why she left. Right. And, that's hard. That takes humility to be able to.
I was about to say, yes, there were.
Yeah. And you have to understand that even people that you think have it all together. Yeah. They're secretly falling apart in some aspect of their life.
In some aspect of their life. I find that's true of everybody. And it's just a matter, some people have it together in their career, but they don't have it together, in their family life or in their emotional or their spiritual or their financial or whatever it is. There's all these different areas of our lives. And most people, pretty much everyone I've ever known is struggling in at least one of those. Right. So
if you start being nice to your ex, you might have somebody that you consider a 10 on the jerky scale, and you might over the years bring them down to a 5,
or maybe a 7.
Well,
10 down to 5 is pretty high hopes.
That's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty. I'm ambitious. This stuff works.
Yeah, it does. But, the thing is that if somebody is a 10, you engaging with and reacting or arguing with them is not going to shift the dynamic.
Totally pointless.
That's what most people want to do.
You cannot change them.
Right. Emotionally, we get sucked into that conflict and we start pouring our energy into it. And honestly, when you stop pouring your energy into it, you suddenly have energy for all these other areas of your life. And like Thomas said, the thing is, it'll do the most is it'll make them go, what's wrong? What's going on with them? What's going on with him or her? It's like they start trying to figure out like, I know that this client we were talking about with the bank issue, I know that her ex is trying to figure out what the heck is going on because she's responding totally different than what she normally does. And he can't figure it out. And he keeps poking and he keeps trying. The messages keep coming and he's trying because it's always worked in the past. I've always been able to get this reaction out of her. And now I can't. What is going on? And honestly, being able to sit back and watch that is almost, it is. It's more satisfying than engaging in the conflict. But the engaging in the conflict is the immediate. Right. Which is why we tend to, as a human being, to go towards that.
Right. So we all have difficult exes. We all think that our situation's worse than everybody else's.
Yeah.
It's not true.
No, it's not true. If you want to know, if you think you have the worst, then you join our group programs and we'll let you hear everybody else's stories and then you can decide if you actually have the worst or not. So if you are listening to the podcast, please don't forget to rate and review us and also subscribe so you get notified as new episodes are released each week. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit like on this video and then also subscribe to the channel so you get notified as new videos are released each week. And we'll see you soon.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.